Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani's rival Abdullah had rejected the presidential election results, claiming fraud. He continued his protests even after the withdrawal agreement between the US and Afghan Taliban was signed in late February this year. Now, under the terms of the agreement, the US and its NATO allies will withdraw their troops within 14 months. In return, the Taliban will hold talks with the Afghan government. The intra-Afghan talks are scheduled to be held on March 10th. Abdullah announced that he would set his own parallel government. The Taliban has urged instead to focus on an end to the war. This was their advice to both the rivals. Now, US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, he's been having meetings between the two rivals. The question still remains, what is the future of Afghan's political landscape, especially when in the balance is the US-Taliban agreement, which comes under threat in these volatile conditions. Let's find out from our guests. Today, speaking to Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, a journalist. He's joining us from Peshawar today. And we also have with us Mr. Hamdullah Hamdard joining us as an analyst from Kabul. Welcome to both of you to the show. I wanted to begin with you, Mr. Hamdard, on this situation. Abdullah also tweeted earlier. In fact, I would like to read his tweet where he specifically said that no one should have underestimated our commitment to genuine democracy and our resolve to uphold the rule of law. Our track record of self-denial and compromise should not have given cause to anyone to take us for granted. Tell me, what is the scenario like in your opinion?
Well, there is no doubt that on one side we have the US and Taliban deal, a peace deal that they have signed. In that deal also we have one condition which is not implementable at the moment, and Afghan government is opposing that because they do not agree with that condition. On the other side, there is Dr. Abdullah, who does not accept the huge defeat in the presidential elections. He got only 39% of the total eligible votes. And now he is trying to create some problems and trying to do some struggle to enter the government. This time he is putting more pressure than he did in 2014. However, this time there will be no point in his resistance because it's not 2014. In 2014, the Independent Electoral Commission had not announced the presidential elections result. And then Dr. Abdullah was able to use that gap, and then he got entry into the Afghanistan National Unity Government. However, this time, President Ashraf Ghani has got the document from the Independent Electoral Commission, and he is recognized or announced as the president-elect in the 2019 presidential elections. There is no chance for Dr. Abdullah. The difference between the two is that the President Ashraf Ghani's oath-taking ceremony is legal and according to the constitution of the country, and Dr. Abdullah's oath-taking ceremony is something illegal, and it shows only his resistance just to find a room to enter the new government or trying to get some ministries or power-sharing possibility.
This power-sharing possibility, Mr. Hamdard, hold that thought. Let me win here, Mr. Yusufzai. This power-sharing possibility, as Mr. Hamdard said, this is very different from the scenario back in 2014. But at the same time, the parallels are very, very, very similar. In the same way, in 2014, Abdullah contested the election results. He challenged them, and eventually there was an agreement reached where there was a power-sharing formula. It seems like this is headed in the same way. Do you think, Mr. Yusufzai, there's a possibility that this is how it will end up?
There are some similarities and also some differences, as already highlighted. The more, I think, risky thing is that Abdullah has aligned himself with some leaders of the Uzbeks and Hazaras. He himself is claiming to represent the Tajiks, although it is a divided house because there are also other Tajik leaders who are aligned with Ashraf Ghani, including Amrullah Saleh. But I think that, maybe more Uzbeks and Hazaras are supporting his candidature. So that is a bit risky because then it becomes an ethnic and linguistic issue. But I believe that, Ashraf Ghani has got more legitimacy. His victory was announced by the Election Commission of Afghanistan. So it's a very, difficult situation. It's a political crisis in Afghanistan. But more importantly, it will hold up the formation of a joint, inclusive, national negotiating team to talk to Taliban. That is more important at this stage, to try to start the intra-Afghan dialogue and resolve the other hurdles like the exchange of prisoners. Even the U.S. said that, peace is more important than the election results at this stage. So I think that, the Americans are working behind the scenes. There is also mediation going on in Afghanistan itself.
Okay, so here let me pose the question to you, Mr. Hamdard, something that Mr. Yusufzai pointed out, that while putting the legitimacy question aside, the possibility that this can in turn create a lot of hurdles, trouble because of the support groups there. That while Mr. Abdullah says he represents the Tajiks, but he also has the support of the Uzbeks and the Hazaras, this can create a bit of a debacle when it comes to the intra-Afghan talks.
First of all, Dr. Abdullah is not representing Tajiks. His father is Pashtun and he is representing Pashtuns. He doesn't have any Tajik in his team at all. Tajiks are with President Ashraf Ghani. Amrullah Saleh is with Ashraf Ghani, and the strongest man in the northern provinces, Ata Muhammad Noor, who is holding lots of power in Jamiat-e-Islami Party. He is also standing with Ashraf Ghani. So Dr. Abdullah does not have any strong political figures from Tajik tribe with him, and he cannot represent Tajik tribe at all. There is the gap in his team. Unfortunately, there is no coordination within his team. There are some political figures who are just, we can say, almost expired people, because you see Karim Khalili, his party member Sarwar Danish is the vice president of Ashraf Ghani. He is with Ashraf Ghani, so his party is represented very well in Dr. Ashraf Ghani's team. The same is that the other Hazara people in Uzbek, they are also represented very well in Dr. Ashraf Ghani's team, and there is no gap at all. In his political committee of the electoral team, he has people, strong people from all the tribes in Afghanistan. However, he decided one thing before going for the elections or for the electoral campaigns, that he will not have those figures or those people that they have bad name in the past or they are defamed. He will not have those people with him on his side. That's why he took Amrullah Saleh from Tajik people, because Amrullah Saleh is a young politician and he is an intelligence guy as well. He has more intelligence than Dr. Abdullah and his other colleagues that they are claiming.
So you're saying that there is no possibility, there's no real threat, you're saying, right, Mr. Hamdard? There's no real threat from Abdullah in creating...
Once President Ashraf Ghani's team tried to convince Dr. Abdullah, they might have given him some chances or some options, either to enter the government, but not power sharing this time. And I guess he did not accept that. And he wants to put some more pressure or bring some more pressure on Ashraf Ghani, probably for gaining more in the next government cabinet, and he is looking for more power. That's the only thing. He knows that whatever he is doing is not legitimate, and he is questioning his political background and career as well. Probably his political career will end after this presidential elections if he continues his resistance illegally.
Okay, so Mr. Yusufzai, then really is a question about time, right? The presidential elections in the US are right on track. President Trump is eager to get his men home. There's a timeline set here of 14 months. The question really is, how dedicated or committed is the US team at this point, considering they don't have much time left and there is this huge holdup that could possibly delay the entire process.
Yes, I agree, but let me first clarify. I know that story. Abdullah's mother was Tajik. His stepfather was a Pashtun. And he speaks some Pashto as well, but he cannot get votes from the Pashtuns. He is getting most of his votes in the Tajik population, and I know many Tajiks who are with him and many Tajiks who are with Ashraf Ghani. The most prominent Uzbek Rashid Dostum is with him. The most prominent Hazara politician Muhakkik is with him. So I was just trying to make comparison, but I have already said that Ashraf Ghani will have more legitimacy because his victory was declared by the election commission. Whatever the shortcomings in the election, that is the best we can have in the present context. So I think, this is, I know all this regarding who is with whom and who is not with that person. But regarding your question, yes, I think that, Zalmay Khalilzad is there. Mike Pompeo may come as well. They are trying to make an effort because they will like to save the peace agreement, which they have signed with Taliban. Trump put his political capital at risk by signing this agreement, and he will try to make it work. And I think that, there are these challenges. They have to do two things. One, they have to reconcile Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani, and, in whatever way possible, so that there is an acceptable, legitimate government.
Right.
And there is a joint national inclusive negotiating team to talk to Taliban. Mm-hmm. Secondly, they have to implement the terms of the agreement. I agree. I know that the timelines were a bit unrealistic, exchanging prisoners by March 10. Mm-hmm. In 10 days, it was not possible. I don't know why they were in a hurry. And secondly, starting the inter-Afghan dialogue also on the 10th of March. So I think they should have given more time to try to achieve this. But I think that now that, the timeline is difficult to meet, they will make a bigger effort, I believe. The Americans and, the Afghans, they have to resolve these issues because this is a very critical time.
Right.
And, if they want to utilize the opportunity for peace, they have to negotiate first among themselves,
right,
and then with Taliban.
And the Taliban, in turn, Mr. Hamdard, at this point in time, have said that they don't see peace talks happening, in the intra-Afghan talks happening anytime soon because of this political mess that is the landscape of Afghanistan at the moment. It's a strange turn of events, one would say, because if given the trajectory of the Taliban in the past 18 years, this would be an ideal situation for them as on the negotiating table.
Taliban will have to go for the intra-Afghan peace talks, and they will have to go and talk with the Afghan peace negotiating delegation that will be made by the Afghan government. Probably many parties or different parts of the society will be represented in that delegation team, or probably only the government people will be there, but there will have to be national consensus before they send this delegation to talk with the Taliban. So Taliban are definitely trying to even convince Dr. Abdullah more to make the situation more complex so that they can gain more from this situation.
Mr. Yusufzai, we've just got a few minutes left to get your opinion on this. A strange turn of events, definitely, where the Taliban are looking for the Afghan government to come to terms, to a position where they can start these intra-Afghan talks. So what do you make of it? How do you see this playing forward?
I think Taliban have already declared they have an 19-member negotiating team, which also held talks with the Americans. They say we are ready. But they also have a condition. They say first the prisoners to be released, and then we can have the intra-Afghan dialogue. So I think they will be ready to exploit any differences which may emerge on the other side. This is, natural. So that's why I think it's very important for the Afghan side to reconcile and to be ready for the talks as well. Or if there is, some other motive, I don't know. because these talks, are going to lead, as the agreement says, to a post-settlement new Afghan Islamic government. That is very critical point in the agreement, which means a new post-settlement Islamic government. It means this government, or this post-settlement government, if the intra-Afghan dialogue succeeds.
Right.
And that is the question mark, whether the talks can start, whether they can succeed. If not, then there will be a status quo, and it could lead to more violence.
Okay, Mr. Yusufzai there from Peshawar, and Mr. Hamdullah, Hamdard, both of you, thank you for joining us for this part of the show. We'll take a quick short break. We'll be right back to discuss the situation as it evolves in Iraq. Welcome back to Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. We're going to take a look at the political chaos in Iraq at the moment. Mohammad Tawfiq Alawi, who was designated to become the prime minister with the support of what analysts are saying pro-Iranian forces, withdrew his candidacy after he failed to form a government within the constitutionally mandated 30-day deadline. Now, Alawi already had the support of the Iran-affiliated Fatah Alliance, the political wing of the Popular Mobilization Units. The rest of the Iraqi political groups, including Kurdish members of parliament, the majority of Sunnis and the rest of the Shiite parties, were against Alawi. Meanwhile, civilian protests against the corrupt political system continues in various parts of the country. Despite the rapid spread of the coronavirus in Iraq, protesters have continued their demonstrations in Baghdad's Tahrir Square and other public areas, with absolutely no sign of retreat. So far, Iraq has recorded 40 positive cases of the COVID-19 virus and 3 deaths from it. In fact, a few days ago, on March 5th, there were hundreds out, university students in Basra. They were taking part of a rally, and what you could hear as chants was something that went like this. One of the chants we heard were, "Politicians are the real virus. Corruption is the real virus." And this is, of course, them talking in reference to the politicians, the protesters accused of being loyal to Iran instead of Iraq. Now, Basra has been the site of many other rallies where in each the demand is pretty simple. On top of all the demands is the demand that Iran be closed after many cases of the virus have seeped through the borders with people coming in. The protests have been the longest and deadly in recent Iraqi history also. Nearly 700 people have been killed and about 30,000 wounded since they began in October last year. In the parallel space, we see the U.S. also withdrawing support and presence. U.S.'s top aid agency, USAID, has reduced its staff to a skeleton crew that basically takes in charge of $1 billion aid programs aimed at part to stave off the return of ISIS. What we're hoping to discuss and get some insight in today is that, is there a vacuum that is being created? Is this in turn creating an opportunity for pro-Iranian influences, or even creating a conducive landscape for ISIS to strengthen forces? Let's find out from our guests. Today we are joined by Dr. Ahmed Rushdi, the advisor in the Iraqi parliament. He's also the president of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation. He's joining us today from Baghdad. We also have with us Mr. Sami Hamdi. He is a geopolitical risk advisor and editor-in-chief of the International Interest and Geopolitical Risk Advisor, joining us from London. Welcome to both of you. If I can start with you, Dr. Ahmed Rushdi, on the situation as it evolves. The protests continue. Alawi has stepped down. In your opinion, where does the political scenario stand for Iraq?
Well, first of all, let us be honest about the financial situation of Iraq, which has become deteriorated, especially after the drop down of the oil prices, which show that there is no real strategic vision with the Iraqi political blocs, because at the end, with this financial crisis, with Corona, with the demonstrations, and with the presence of ISIS, all those crises, actually, the political bloc does not have any clue about how to deal with the situation in Iraq. So, rejecting Alawi, now it looks like it was one of the biggest mistakes, because at the end, what Allawi was saying is that I want to make a government with independent persons who can be governed by political blocs inside the parliament. That's it. But eventually, the political blocs didn't see something like that. They saw someone who actually came from abroad, want to make a government, and preventing them from getting their interest from the Iraqi government. They didn't see actually the political, or let's say the economical situation of Iraq. They didn't manage to evaluate the situation, the sequelae of rejecting Allawi. Now there are 4 or 5 names for prime minister. Of all of them, they don't have a real vision, except if we return to, well, that's what the people saying now, except if we return to Al-Abadi, because Abadi has some sort of he actually defeat Daesh. At the same time, he made at least some sort of reforms in the economical situation of Iraq.
So, Mr. Hamdi, what's your opinion on this? What happens now that Allawi is out? Who do the Iraqis turn to? Who's the next candidate in line to fill in this void?
The problem is within the question itself. Who is the next candidate? The Iraqis do not want a candidate that is put forward by this particular parliament. Everybody knows that with the Abadi experience, they know what it's like when somebody is put forward. They claim he is an independent. They claim that he is the choice of the Iraqi people. And everybody saw that Abadi was simply continuing the Iran control of Iraq. Today we see a similar situation. Muqtada Sadr finds himself in a very difficult situation. He's decided to join the ranks of this, at least ostensibly, while trying to push through his candidate, who was Allawi. Everybody knew Allawi was Muqtada Sadr's candidate. They know that Muqtada Sadr has deep ties with the Iranians. The reason Allawi's government was not able to put through was not necessarily because the people were against it, even though many were. It was because the Iranian parties themselves could not agree. Maliki rebelled against the discipline, the line. Ever since the death of Qasim Soleimani, the Shia parties don't have that discipline that they once had with regards to coming together and backing a candidate. In going back to your question, who is the next candidate, this is the real issue. The people are saying we want the whole system changed. We want everybody out. We don't trust anybody. Everybody has allegiances, whether it's to the Americans or to the Iranians. And everybody can see that there is a game being played whereby the political elite are trying to protect themselves by putting forward these candidates like Allawi, like Abadi, like to save their skin, not to make any real changes.
Here, let me add another voice to the conversation. Mr. George Szamuely, an American policy expert, he's just joining us. Mr. Szamuely, the conversation has taken a bit of a turn, as Mr. Hamdi rightly pointed out. It's really the political system that the protesters are looking to change here. What they're seeing in turn are the same, the different faces representing the same system. We're seeing Allawi gone. We've seen, as Mr. Hamdi talks about this, that the Iranian influencers themselves are pretty disoriented on who they would point to now. The one chance they did have a unity on a candidate was Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi. But he seems to be out of the race also. Where is the political scenario now turning to in Iraq?
Well, I think the chaos will continue for quite some time, particularly as the economic crisis caused by the fall in oil prices is likely to continue for a while. There doesn't seem to be any likelihood of resolution with oil prices in free fall, with the coronavirus also having an adverse impact on the world economy. The economic problems with Iraq are going to increase. And when you add to that the grave instability caused by the assassination of Soleimani and the leader of the PMU in Iraq, then I think there are very serious problems ahead. And how does this manifest itself? Well, it manifests itself most obviously in the failure to fight ISIL. And that's also going to become a serious problem, because I think ISIL will grow in strength because the forces that were arrayed against it are now in disarray, so to speak.
It is a big concern because it creates this scenario where it seems that there is now a power vacuum. Dr. Rushdi, this is a concern for you also, that there are now with the US aid also withdrawing their numbers there. the kind of sort of ambivalence after we've seen a non-binding resolution, though, from the Iraqi parliament that U.S. withdraws their forces from there. We've heard on one occasion, Senator Chris Murphy talk about this, that the administration has talked about getting Iraq back on its feet, that is a priority, but slashing US aid is doing the opposite. Is there a power vacuum being created which the ISIS could take advantage of?
Well, my colleagues actually, both of them, they were very frank about the situation in Iraq on security and economical basis. And let's be frank, at the end, Iraq needs the help of the U.S. In one another, economically and also on a security basis, because we all know ISIS is still there. ISIS is still going on in their strengthening their power and so on. And with the helpless government, with the economical and financial problems of the economy of Iraq and so on, all those things actually making the Iraqi government more and more poor in getting capabilities of fighting Daesh. So at the end, even what's happened with Alawi and what's happening now, and because the Iranian now actually supporting Abdul Mahdi, that Abdul Mahdi should stay in power, should stay as a caretaker government, head of the caretaker government, which is also a very big mistake, because in 1 year Iraq become the deficit becoming about, let's say, $43 billion, and in 1 year, if Adil Abdul Mahdi would say we are going to $100 billion, so it's a problem. It's a real problem.
Mr. Hamdi, your take on the presence of ISIS, is it regaining strength? Because we heard the ambassador Jeffrey, the US ambassador Jeffrey, talk about this, that it's not a real, there hasn't been such an uptake in numbers.
I think ISIS, we exaggerate the threat of ISIS these days in Iraq and even in Syria, because we have to think about it. America needs a reason to stay in Iraq, and that reason is terrorism. Iran needs a reason to justify its militias, to justify the Popular Mobilization Force, so it says that it needs to stay there to prevent ISIS. The Kurds need to justify the continued funding from the US and the presence of the Peshmerga, so they say that we need this militia in order to make sure that we can fight ISIS. I think we exaggerate the importance of ISIS. I think the real reason why ISIS emerged was because of marginalization, was because of economic deprivation of large areas of Iraq. We have to remember that Iraq has become a sectarian country. The Iraqis protesting are saying, we don't want to be a sectarian country. We don't want to be Sunni, Shia, Kurdish. We want to be Iraqis. This is why it is the greatest threat to Iran's threat on Iraq, because if you transform the identity of Iraq from a sectarian to a national, Iran can no longer exert itself. And this is why we see the talk of ISIS, because ISIS distracts from the real issue. I'm not saying it's not a threat, but it's certainly not a major threat as we paint it to be. And it remains a political tool used to justify the presence of Iran, of the US, and of every other international power that wants to take a stake in Iraq's resources.
Mr. Szamuely, as Mr. Hamdi just said, that the real reason of ISIS manifesting itself in the first place in Iraq was marginalization, the economic decline, and that is continuing with the political chaos. And as you mentioned, the oil prices dropping today is taking the events to a worse point. So what is the way forward here, considering that the US's presence there in itself has to be justified? What do you think? How is it going to move forward?
Well, I think ISIS emerged as a consequence of the instability in Iraq. So the more instability is triumphant, the greater the power of ISIS. So therefore, since there is instability now, ISIS will grow in strength. Now, of course, the United States has always played a double game with regard to ISIS. Yes, ISIS is the justification for the U.S. presence in Iraq, which is why the United States has never really had an interest in completely defeating ISIS. So therefore, in order to maintain that justification, what it's doing now is essentially cutting back completely on the fight against ISIS in order to help ISIS grow in strength, and then provide a rationale for a continued U.S. presence and to exert pressure on the Iraqi politicians to essentially beg the United States to stay in Iraq. So, yes, of course, instability, economic injustice, deprivation, all that feeds into ISIS.
Right.
But ultimately, it is the root cause of ISIS is political and economic stability, and that's that goes back now several decades. And I think that, unfortunately, the only way you can win against ISIS is through a military solution. Then, of course, you do, of course, need to address the economic injustice issues. But to ISIS, yes, unfortunately, there is only a military solution.
So you think there's only a military solution there. Dr. Rushdi, there's also concern that the U.S. is trying to reduce footprint. What with the U.S. foreign aid programs being slashed? These programs were supposed to stabilize Iraq, right? As there are years of warfare behind that need to be addressed. There's also the question of Islamic State as a terrorist group that needs to be addressed. What is the Iraqi government in a position to negotiate with the Trump administration at this point? And maybe what kind of a deal is possible to get them back on board?
Well, I think the Iraqi government does not have actually any real agenda about making negotiations with the Mr. Trump administration. And it looks like that even the Shiite bloc tried hard to make at least a first step, is that they're denying or at least removing the idea of discharging the American forces from Iraq by a meeting happened before I think 4 or 5 days in Al-Hikmah palace meeting room, and what happened is that Shamkhani came to Baghdad and say to them, you don't have even any idea about what's happening in the area. You should not remove such a thing from your agenda because it's the American forces will leave from the area. So it looks like that they don't have any agenda about how to negotiate with the Trump administration, and also they don't actually giving anything for the Americans or for the West about the situation in Iraq and how to invest this relationship, which has happened 2003 invasion with the U.S. and with the West. At the end, just I said, it's totally failure government. I don't know why Adil Abdul Mahdi insisted to stay in the government as the head of the caretaker government. I don't know why the Iranian insisted on Adil Abdul Mahdi. It looks like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, all they are suffering from the same issue, economical failure, total economical failure. And I don't know how it's going to be managed by them. It looks like that at the end, those countries will fall down eventually.
So there seems in consensus the opinion that there is no strategic planning here for the future. Nothing was, they were not prepared at all for, especially the latest development, the oil prices dropping, the political chaos. But let's talk about the U.S. very quickly, Mr. Hamdi, because we've got our last minute here. Last year, we saw Secretary of State Mike Pompeo ordering a partial evacuation of the U.S. diplomatic personnel there from the Iraq, Baghdad embassy, and that then later on news came in looking for making that withdrawal permanent. Do you see the U.S. using this as a bargaining chip in the near future?
I don't think. I think we are overestimating the U.S. here. I think the U.S. have no issues with what's going on in Iraq. The protests are against Iranian-backed politicians. They're against pro-Iran-backed politicians. Baghdad is firmly in Iran's hand. The attention on the U.S. forces was from the Iranians to try to deflect the anger of the protesters. For the U.S., the game is very simple. Even if they withdraw troops, they can always bring them back later. For the U.S., they're happy to watch what's going on in Iraq. I don't think the U.S. is concerned at all, and I think even if there is a withdrawal of troops, U.S. can always send them under a made-up UN resolution or the like.
Sure, so you can do. Thank you so much, Mr. Sami Hamdi and Mr. George Szamuely. Also, Dr. Rushdi, for giving us your opinion on this debate. We've unfortunately run out of time. We will see you tomorrow with more news and analysis. Till then, goodbye.